Okay, this is an important part of our economy, no doubt about it. That hasn't changed. But as students have come back, it's put pressure on the reputation of the sector. It's brought shonks into the system that we need to crack down on.
Well, that was the Education Minister Jason Clare there, unveiling the long-awaited caps on foreign student numbers in Australia. The government has been promising to hit the brakes on international student enrolments since migration numbers surged back after the pandemic. The jump in net overseas migration created a political headache for Labor. Peter Dutton has been particularly hammering the point that migrants are to blame for house prices in particular. But is limiting the foreign student intake the answer? And what will the consequence of this be for a sector that has been one of Australia's biggest export earners? Universities also use this revenue to help subsidise courses for Australian students and research. And then there's the soft diplomacy benefit as well. A foreign student can create lifelong ties to Australia by spending a few years studying here. The government says it's cracking down on the shonks in the sector, but there are big risks in this week's move. I'm David Spears on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Professor Michael Wesley is someone I've known for a long time. He's an international relations expert who's worked at various universities, was also the head of the Lowy Institute for International Policy. He's now the Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Melbourne, one of the group of 8 top unis that, well, certainly look like being the hardest hit by these caps that have been announced. Michael Wesley, thanks for joining us. Good to talk to you.
G'day, David. Thanks for having me on the program.
So what do you know a few days on from this announcement about the impact this is going to have on your university?
Well, we're still trying to work those questions through, David. We've been given a number, but we're still trying to work out what that number actually means for us. And we're working hard in consultation with the Department of Education to bring about a bit more clarity. But what it does mean for the sector, I think, is that revenue growth and that finances will become an ongoing challenge for Australian universities at a time when the costs of running universities are rising. You know, we are impacted by inflation and increasing wage bills. It costs a lot of money to run a university, and the government has effectively put a ceiling on our ability to raise money to cover those costs.
And I want to come to that, but just on the numbers, you said the department has given you a number, so each individual university a number. But are you suggesting there's some doubt as to whether that's an accurate number?
Look, as I said, we're working with the department to really understand what that number means.
Explain that to me, because, I mean, it would seem to me that if they give you a number, that's the number. You can enrol that many students, but why is it more complicated than that?
Well, what we're trying to work through is there are a whole lot of carve-outs to the caps. Right. That we're aware of, and we're trying to work out what those carve-outs really mean for the absolute number of students that are starting. It's become clear to us that the universities and the Department of Education have got different ways of calculating student numbers. Right. And one of the things that we've been doing with the department, and we've been working in a spirit of goodwill with the department to try and reconcile those differences between ways of counting students.
So what are the carve-outs? Like postgraduate versus other students, or what are the carve-outs? So
those carve-outs include sponsored students, so students coming in on Australia Awards scholarships. The carve-outs include students from Timor-Leste and the Pacific. They include postgraduate research students. So there are a range of different carve-outs, and there's actually an extensive list of carve-outs, and we're just looking at what that actually means. There's also provisions that students who change institutions will be counted within the new institution's cap, but students that change degrees or courses within a current institution stay within the cap. So there's quite a lot of, this is a very, very complex system, David. The system of international student administration is very, very complex, and we need to be sure that we're doing the right thing if we're told to do what we're supposed to do by the government.
Are you able to tell us what the number is the department's given you?
No, I'm not going to give you that number, I'm afraid, David,
Okay.
because at this stage we still don't have a lot of certainty about what that number means.
And how long is this going to take for you to work out? Because presumably you've got to sort out your enrolments for next year. The clock's ticking on this.
Well, this is the thing. It takes 2 years to recruit an international student. By the time you get through the inquiries process, by the time you issue them an offer, by the time you check their credentials and you get their scores, and by the time they actually accept the offer. So to expect universities to implement this from the 1st of January 2025 means that there are a whole lot of offers out there that universities will have to rescind if the government sticks to its plans for capping students from January 2025.
So you'll have to withdraw offers that have already been made.
Presumably so, yes. And that creates breach of contract problems, that creates reputational problems, not only for individual universities, but for the university sector.
When you say breach of contract, will you have to, what's the impact of that? Is there some financial impact?
Look, our legal team is actually working on that, and I would think 39 universities' legal teams across Australia are working on that. We're not sure about that yet. Look, David...
Should the government cover that if there's some cost here from breaching contracts?
I think a much better solution, David, and this is what I would urge on the government, don't rush into this. It is clear that there is an enormous amount of complexity that the sector has to work through. Don't rush into this. Don't do this from the 1st of January 2025. Do this in 2026. Give us a year to work through this with the government in good faith. Don't rush into it. If we rush into it, there will be immeasurable harm done to the sector.
How long is it going to take, do you think, to work out the details? If they don't agree to the 12-month delay that you're suggesting, are we talking weeks to sort this out or longer?
Look, I would think this will take weeks. This is not an obvious solution to this. As I said, the complexities of this are quite considerable. I do wonder how much the government understands the complexities of the international student sector, what universities do, the administration systems that we have to undergo. This is something that I think both the government and universities need to work on together. If we go into a rushed solution, we will end up with really serious unintended consequences.
The group of 8 universities, which includes the University of Melbourne, have estimated the cost of this at just over $1 billion collectively. That 62%, nearly 2/3 of the cuts will apply to these, the top 8, the group of 8 universities. How have they arrived at that $1 billion figure if it's so unclear at the moment?
Look, I think they've probably done an aggregate across the group of 8 and done some economic modelling. I think they've got very talented economic modellers that work for it. I don't know the exact details of this, David. Can I just make the point, though, that at the Senate inquiry into this legislation, it became very clear that the government has not done formal economic modelling. It has not done a regulatory impact assessment on this. That just staggers me. For a sector that is Australia's 4th largest export earner, a sector that provided over half of Australia's economic growth last year, to be putting a cap on its ability to earn money, to actually be decreasing the ability of some of the most successful universities in attracting international students without doing economic modelling at a time when economists are genuinely worried about the economy sliding into recession, would seem to me just to be an incredible piece of policy making.
What's the impact on domestic students? Because again, the group of 8 in the numbers they've done warn that a lot of that revenue is used to cross-subsidise course offerings for domestic students, dentistry, science, allied health, nursing courses. Is that the same? Is that the case at the University of Melbourne?
So let me put it in these terms, David. The university sector has been asked to educate more and more Australians over the last 20 years without being given more and more government money. So we're expected to provide more and more Australians with a world-class education, but not given extra money to do it. So we've had to fill the gap from the only sustainable source of increasing revenue that we have, which is international students. What the government has effectively done is to say, well, you can no more raise money to fill that gap at a time when Jason Clare's own Universities Accord report has said that we need to double the number of Australians that we educate in the university sector by 2050. So the cost of this will ultimately fall either on Australian students who will face declining standards of education or on the Australian taxpayer.
So if the government proceeds with this, are those targets that it's set out in the Universities Accord that you referenced there, are they going to be unachievable?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. I mean, the other unintended consequence of this, David, is that it will kill the private higher education sector in Australia. We're already seeing the financial backers of private education run for the exits. We're already seeing the private investors who fund the building of student accommodation run for the exits.
Why are those private providers so important? Because this is where we hear the government talk about the shonks, those who are just set up to bring in people to do a course, but they're really here to work in Australia.
Well, there's no doubt that there are some shonks, but there are a large number of highly reputable, extremely good private education providers. And if you're going to double the number of Australians you educate in higher education over the next 25 years, the private sector will need to step in unless the government is prepared to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in building new universities and university colleges. I can't see any evidence of a government being prepared to do that. So the private sector will have to play a big part. These caps have taken that option off the table.
Just sticking with universities, though, the government argues the numbers for next year will be the same as they were last year. Sure, the big group of 8 unis will lose, but the second tier and the regional universities will be able to enrol more. They will benefit. What's wrong with that argument?
So there's a couple of things I would observe with that argument, David. The first one is that Australia's international reputation for international education has taken an absolute battering. It's not only this piece of legislation, it's the fact that the visa processing has been slowed down enormously through Ministerial Directive 107 that Clare O'Neill brought in earlier this year.
That's going to go, though. Jason Clare said he'll get rid of that.
But you have to realise the damage that has done to our reputation overseas. The other element here, David, the trifecta of blows to international education is the almost doubling of the visa fee for applying for a student visa to come to Australia. It makes us 700 Australian dollars more expensive than the next highest visa fee. Now, if you put yourself in the position of an international student looking to travel to get their university education, you're looking through the options and you consider an Australian university, whether it's a metropolitan or a regional university, you think, A, How long is it going to take me to get this visa? I've heard lots of stories that people wait months to get their visas to go to Australia, weeks to get their visas to go to America. Secondly, I'm going to have to pay almost double what I'm going to have to pay for a Canadian, 3 times what I'm going to have to pay for a British visa. And lastly, I may not come in under the cap. You know, that is a devastating trifecta for international education for Australia. That will affect not only universities like the University of Melbourne, it is currently pushing regional universities to the wall. They have lost hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue.
So you don't think they'll be able to pick up the slack here, that students won't go to those regional universities?
Not if these conditions are in place. So, okay, you take Ministerial Directive 107 off the table. You've still got the highest visa application fee of any English-speaking country, and you've got the prospect that even if you apply, you may not get in under the cap. And so that will damage the entire sector.
What do you say to the argument that the big universities, Melbourne and Sydney in particular, have been tapping the rivers of gold of foreign students for too long, gone too far down this road that you need to wind back? Are you saying you've had no choice?
Look, I think there are always choices. For example, at the University of Melbourne, we've done a lot of work on what we call our size and shape, how much more we can grow. And we were well into the process of tapering our growth. We realised that we can't continue to grow. We're also working on changing, diversifying our student population, both domestically and internationally. So that work was already underway. That is work that takes money. It is work that is now imperilled by the decision of the government to arbitrarily impose caps.
When you talk about diversifying, are you saying you were too reliant on Chinese students in particular?
We would like a more broadly diverse student population, both domestically and internationally.
Because of the fear that China can turn off the tap?
Well, for a range of reasons, yes. I mean, there are a range of reasons. Let me just say, David, that international students add to the quality and richness of education for all students at the University of Melbourne. Having greater diversity increases the diversity of opinions, the diversity of views. It increases our ability to create global graduates. That's why it's important.
Final one, Michael Wesley. The whole argument that led to this was that net overseas migration jumped far too quickly. That's put a lot of pressure on the housing sector as well. The government needs to pull various levers, including this one, to bring that under control. What do you think about that argument that this migration problem, and it certainly has been a political problem, needs to be dealt with? Australians want it dealt with.
Look, I can completely understand that, David, but sheeting home all of the blame to international students, I think, is very, very short-sighted, and it won't actually solve the problem. What happened was that post-COVID, there was a surge in international students coming in, many of them who had deferred their studies during COVID because they needed to be on campus to finish off their studies. So that was one group of people. You'll also remember that at the time, the Morrison government was encouraging more students to come in and allowing more students to come in because they were scared of labour shortages and a lack of demand in the economy. So what we've seen is a short-term surge in student numbers, which has already returned to below historical growth through Ministerial Directive 107 and through the higher visa charge. They've already solved the problem. They don't need to go further than this. If they continue down the path that they are on here, they will cause irreparable damage. What I'm saying, David, is that the combination of reputational effects that we talked about has us worried across the sector that we will not even reach the caps that we have been given. The policy effects of what they've done means that we could be in a situation which is playing itself out in Canada. We have a real-time experiment going on in Canada. Canadian universities are going to the wall because they've been given caps, but the reputational effects of what the Canadian government has done has meant even Canada's best and most highly ranked universities cannot fill their caps. I really worry that that is the situation that we will see ourselves in mid-2025, and I cannot even think of the implications for the Australian economy.
Well, it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. Professor Michael Wesley, Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Melbourne, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks very much, David.
And if you have any thoughts on this conversation or any ideas for this podcast, where we can go in the future, please send us an email, insiders@abc.net.au, and we'll be talking more about these university foreign student caps on Sunday. Hope you can join us then. Bye for now.